have always been drawn to the peculiar and macabre, but little did I know that my fascination would lead me to the eerie events that unfolded at Sukiya, the prestigious restaurant that once graced our city. My name is Daniel, and for years I served as a waiter in this establishment. To this day, I am haunted by the memories of the last night Sukiya was open. It was a cold and rainy evening in late October. The gloomy clouds hung low over the city, casting an ominous shadow on Sukiya's elegant facade. The restaurant was nestled in the heart of the city, renowned for its exquisite cuisine, opulent decor, and a clientele that was more accustomed to the fine things in life. But beneath its glamorous exterior, there was an unsettling presence that gnawed at my senses. I arrived for my evening shift, and as soon as I walked through the grand double doors, I felt a chill run down my spine. The usual bustle of the restaurant seemed muted, and the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for something dreadful to happen. My manager, Mr. Landon, greeted me with an odd look in his eyes. "Daniel, we're expecting a very important guest tonight," he said in a hushed tone. "He's reserved the private dining room on the upper floor. Ensure everything is perfect." The private dining room was on the second floor, accessible only via a spiraling wooden staircase. It was a luxurious chamber with plush crimson drapes, antique chandeliers, and a long mahogany table that could seat 20. As I ascended the staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The guest was a mysterious man named Mr. Blackwood. He had booked the entire upper floor for the evening, and his party consisted of 12 people. I had never heard of him before, and neither had any of my colleagues. Yet, there was an aura of dread surrounding him that sent shivers down our spines. As I entered the private dining room, Mr. Blackwood was already there, seated at the head of the table. He was a tall, gaunt man with pale skin and piercing blue eyes that seemed to penetrate your soul. He wore a black suit that was impeccably tailored, but it seemed to absorb all the light in the room, leaving only his pale visage visible. The air in the room was stifling, and the silence was deafening. Mr. Blackwood's guests, equally enigmatic figures, sat in silence, their faces hidden in the shadows. I could barely make out their features, but their stillness sent a wave of unease through me. I approached Mr. Blackwood and introduced myself. He acknowledged me with a nod, but said nothing. His silence was unnerving, and I felt a growing sense of dread in his presence. The dinner began, and I served course after course, each dish prepared with meticulous care by our talented chefs. But there was something unsettling about the way Mr. Blackwood and his guests ate. They picked at their food, barely tasting it, as if the act of eating was a mere formality. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew even more eerie. The guests whispered among themselves in hushed tones, and their voices seemed to echo in the room. Mr. Blackwood echoed all at me with those penetrating eyes, and I felt as if he was studying me, dissecting my very soul. Hours passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air grew colder, and the chandeliers above us swayed as if moved by an invisible force. I noticed that the other waitstaff were equally disturbed, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. At long last, dessert was served, a decadent chocolate mousse. As I placed a plate in front of Mr. Blackwood, he finally spoke, his voice like a whisper in the darkness. "Do you believe in fate, Daniel?" I stammered, taken aback by the sudden question. I'm not sure, sir." He leaned in closer, his eyes locked onto mine. "We are all pawns in a grand game, Daniel. Some of us are destined for greatness, while others are destined for something far darker." I tried to hide my unease, but his words sent a chill through me. The other guests stared at me, their eyes unblinking, as if waiting for my response. Before I could reply, there was a loud crash from the kitchen below. Plates and silverware clattered to the floor, and a chef's scream pierced the air. I excused myself from the table and rushed downstairs to see what had happened. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. The chefs were in disarray, their faces contorted in fear. They claimed that the knives and pots had flown off the shelves on their own, and the stove had erupted into flames without warning. It was as if some malevolent force had taken hold of the restaurant. I returned to the dining room, my heart pounding. Mr. Blackwood and his guests were still seated at the table, seemingly unfazed by the commotion. He turned to me and said, "It seems fate has a way of making itself known." As the night wore on, the restaurant descended into madness. Lights flickered, and eerie whispers echoed through the halls. Dishes shattered, and the paintings on the walls twisted and contorted as if alive. The other guests in the restaurant fled in terror, leaving only Mr. Blackwood and his party behind. I couldn't take it any longer. The sense of impending doom was overwhelming, and I had to escape. I made my way to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, a powerful gust of wind slammed it shut with a resounding thud. I turned to find Mr. Blackwood standing behind me, his eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. "You cannot leave, Daniel," he said. "You are part of this now." With those words, Ards pulled back into the dining room, the door locking behind me. I was trapped with Mr. Blackwood and his ghastly guests. Hours turned into an eternity as the night stretched on. Mr. Blackwood and his guests continued to whisper among themselves, their words incomprehensible. The room seemed to close in on me, and I felt as though I was suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the madness stopped. The lights returned to normal, the whispers ceased, and the room was once again as it should be. But Mr. Blackwood and his guests were gone, leaving behind only empty chairs. I stumbled out of the private dining room, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. The restaurant was in ruins, its once elegant decor reduced to shambles. It was as if a hurricane had torn through the place, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. I found Mr. Landon cowering in a corner, his face ashen. He had witnessed the chaos as well, and he knew that Sukiya was beyond salvation. We never spoke of that night again, and Sukiya was never able to reopen its doors. It became a place of legend, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones. No one knew what had truly happened that fateful evening. To this day, I am haunted by the memory of Mr. Blackwood and his enigmatic guests. I cannot escape the feeling that they were something beyond human, something ancient and powerful. And I fear that they will return one day, seeking to claim their next unwitting victim. So, if you ever find yourself in the vicinity of the old Sukiya Restaurant, do not be tempted to enter. For the darkness that resides within those walls is a force beyond comprehension, and once it has you in its grasp, there is no escape from the horrors that await.